Hello there, welcome. Hope you're having a great day today. My name is Tracy. If you've never watched one of my videos, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. If you are a return watcher, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 3 Bible chapters. We are going to be looking at Leviticus chapters 9, 10, and 11. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button, please do so. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's get started with Leviticus chapter 9. In this chapter, we begin to see the priests actually begin their work after the ordination ceremony. Now, throughout the chapter, we can see a lot about different sacrifices that were made, specifically how those sacrifices were made. And I want to point out something from verse 24. Verse 24 says, "Fire blazed forth from the Lord's presence and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. When the people saw this, they shouted with joy and fell face down on the ground." So I can only imagine that that was quite the sight to behold, this fire coming down from heaven, consuming this sacrifice. My footnote says this. It says that as a display of his mighty power, God sent fire to consume Aaron's offering. Aaron was the one that made this offering. The Israelites fell to the ground in awe. Today, some people wonder if God really exists because they don't see things like this. But God is at work in today's world just as he was in Moses' world. God displays his power in a variety of ways, sometimes most effectively through the body of believers, which he is using to change the world. When you begin to see acts of love and faith that only God's Spirit could empower, you will realize that these things are just as supernatural as God's mighty physical acts. So even though we may not see fire coming from the heavens today, we need to keep our eyes open, be aware, and look around for those signs in today's world that God is indeed still at work. Leviticus chapter 10. We see Aaron's sons at the beginning of this chapter. They have unique names. They are Nadab and Abihu. And something kind of crazy happens. So let's look at the first verse here. It says, "Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, put coals of fire in their incense burners and sprinkled incense over them. In this way, they disobeyed the Lord by burning before him the wrong kind of fire, different than he had commanded." So get this. Fire blazed forth from the Lord's presence and burned them, talking about these 2 brothers, up, and they died before the Lord. So, when we were talking about the previous chapter, chapter 9, we saw fire come down and consume a proper offering. This is what happened when Aaron's sons did not obey and follow the rules. I want to share with you my footnote that talks about this. It says, what was wrong with the kind of fire that they had? Aaron's sons were careless about following the laws for sacrifices. So in response, we see God actually consume them with fire. Performing the sacrifices was an act of obedience, and doing them correctly showed respect for God. It is easy for us to grow careless about obeying God, to live our way instead of God's way. But if one way we were just as good as another, God would have commanded us to live in his way. He always has good reasons for his commands, and we always place ourselves in danger when we consciously or carelessly obey him. So even though we may not see God consuming people or burning them up by fire still today, it is still not wise to disobey his commands and not follow the guidelines that he has put in place for us. Leviticus chapter 11. This is kind of a popular chapter because this chapter is often looked at by people because it talks about during this time period what animals were considered clean and unclean. And if you read through the chapter, you will see that a lot of the animals that we consume today at that time were not considered to be clean to consume. And sometimes there's some controversy surrounding whether or not these rules still apply. They are in the Old Testament, and I want to share with you a footnote that kind of helps to clarify why some things were considered clean versus unclean. So for verses 46 through 47, it says, "These are the instructions regarding land animals, birds, marine creatures, and animals that scurry along the ground. By these instructions, you will know what is unclean and clean, and which animals may be eaten and which may not be eaten." My footnote says that these designations were actually made to let the Israelites know which animals to eat and not to eat. There were several reasons for these restrictions, and I don't know if you've ever thought about some of these. Number one, health reasons. If some of these animals were consumed, it could cause the people to become ill. If you think about it, during that time period, they didn't have refrigerators and the same sanitary luxuries that we have today. So part of the restrictions had to do with their health. These forbidden foods were usually scavenging animals that fed on dead animals. Thus, disease could be transmitted through them. The second reason was to visibly distinguish Israel from other nations. The pig, for example, was a common sacrifice of pagan religions. And if you'll remember, during this time frame, you had a lot of people who were still worshiping other things. And then number three, to avoid objectionable associations. Animals that scurry along the ground, for example, were reminiscent of serpents, which often symbolized sin. So I thought that was interesting. So just a little more insight into why these specific rules were in place during this time for the consumption of certain animals and not consuming other types of animals. So thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you next time.